I'm incredibly excited to be with you all here today to talk about how we could all more effectively lead through adversity. And the reason that I love this topic as both a leader now of people, but just both in our personal lives and our professional lives, is because adversity is not a one-time thing. It's going to happen to us throughout our entire lives, both in our personal and professional capacities. And how we get around that adversity often comes down to the tools or skills that we have in our bag, our adversity bag. Now, a little bit about me. I'm no stranger to adversity. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I was raised by my single mother until I was 14 years old. Both my parents suffered from pretty bad addictions, which caused a lot of tumultuous times and difficult hardships in our household. But at 14, that was the year that really my life changed. You see, that year, my mother had lost her job. And I came home one day from high school to find out we were getting evicted. Now, I could tell you that was bad, but unfortunately, it got a little bit more difficult. My mother was going to go live with a friend of hers, but there was no room for me. And she told me I had to go find a place on my own. I could tell you that I remember a lot of the feelings that I went through as a 14-year-old. They were sadness, anger, confusion. I was depressed. I was hopeless. And I remember the days leading up to the eviction, I kept thinking about what I was going to pack, right? I had one suitcase and a few garbage bags. And a few buddies of mine helped me pack, some basics like clothes and toiletries. But I left a lot of those things behind to actually pack things like comic books and baseball cards that had a secondary market value so that I could raise money to just buy food. And so, I think about my journey as a 14-year-old child. That day when I had to pack my stuff, we carried my bags to my vice principal's office in high school, dropped them off and said I had nowhere to go, to my journey here today. And every step along the way, I've kind of had to keep going in my bag, keep going in my adversity bag, adding new things, thinking about which things to use. And 2020 is a great example of adversity at its best, right? All of us went through something. We all suffered through, or witnessed the pandemic, racial and social injustice. We saw an insurrection on the Capitol building. I mean, you name it, we saw it. And that's why when I think about adversity and I think about, how I visualize it, I often think of a brick wall. A brick wall to me is the perfect way to look at it. You'll hear a lot of people talk about it that way. And the reason why to me it's perfect is because a brick wall is what you imagine it to be, right? It can be as high as the Empire State Building. It can be short, narrow, wide. And a lot of the way in which you envision that wall comes down to what's in your adversity bag and the experiences that you have dealing with that adversity in the past. That's why 3, 4 of us, 5 of us can look at the same piece of adversity and see a completely different wall. And, as I've gone through the journey, I sit here today, I was the first person from my foster care agency to graduate from a 4-year college, first person in my family to become a lawyer, let alone I could have never in my wildest dreams imagined I'd be a managing director at Goldman Sachs. And each time it's come down to, how do I get through what's going on in my personal life? How do I get through what's going on in my professional life to continue growing and continue becoming both a better person and better professional? And so as leaders, I think about the same exact question. And you often hear people talking about, 3 things that you need to do well to be an effective leader, right? People will say you need to be flexible. People will say you need to be nimble. And people will say you need to adapt. Now, adapting for me is the story of my life. As I've just shared with you, it's been a little bit of a rough journey, but I'm still here and still kicking. But I think, how you get there, how you're flexible, how you're nimble, how you're adaptive comes to some, other skills and traits that we can all learn from each other about. So I'm going to share with you 5 things that I do in order to sort of lead through adversity, both professionally and personally. So the first thing I'd say is it's probably a good idea to be very calm during adverse times or times of uncertainty. Your people are going to follow your lead. If you are chaotic, if you're frantic, your team around you is going to feel the same way. It's hard to get things done. Team morale can really drop. On top of that, the people that you may rely on the most are going to leave, because if they think that you're not organized or they think that times are chaotic, they're going to feel the same way about their own situation, and it's possible they're going to leave you. The second tip I'd say is to actively listen. Actively listening is different than hearing. As a trained lawyer, for the lawyers in the house, you probably remember these days where you would prepare incredibly long outlines for depositions or witness interviews. They would be, 20, 30 pages long. You would imagine every possible question you could think of. You would imagine how the witness was going to answer the question. Once the interview got cooking, and you got into the real saucy stuff, the witness would give you a new piece of information. And if you didn't hear it and you didn't listen and you didn't respond to it and pivot on the dime to follow up on that piece of information, you potentially lost your entire case, or you'd have to kick yourself in the butt afterwards for missing this incredibly important piece of information because you stuck to that outline. And that's kind of how we have to think about work and leading people, right? If you stick to the same things that you've been doing your entire career and you're not listening to your people, you're not learning as a leader, you're not learning as a professional. We all respond to different factors. We all respond to different motivators. One of the things that I learned along the way was, and especially in the beginning, we reached out to everyone. We wanted to definitely be connected, make sure we spoke to folks. But I think we over-zoomed it a little bit, right? We just kind of kept putting on these Zoom meetings. And a few of us, finally sat in a room and said, we probably need to chill out a little bit on the Zoom. People got, their kids working in the background and school. Everyone's working from home. We need to probably just dial it back a little bit, right? And, tied to that sort of active listening and adjusting is being honest. My third thing, be honest with yourself, including when you make mistakes. Share the fact that you made mistakes and be vulnerable. I just mentioned one mistake. I think we over-zoomed it a little bit. I think the other thing that we did, again, we were really good about reaching out, setting up meetings, etc. But every meeting became task-oriented, right? It was like, did you get this done? And we were so worried about everyone's personal and professional life balance that we actually forgot to be a little bit more human. Like, just have that organic conversation the same way you would if someone sat outside your office. You might not be able to grab coffee with them, but you can virtually. We weren't giving feedback the same way, right? We had to pivot, because if everything becomes task-oriented, there's no team building, there's no morale, and then everything around you just becomes sort of robotic. And so we had to pivot that. In terms of being vulnerable, during the pandemic, I had two losses in my family. Two people passed away during the time, and it was hard. And I told people that worked with me in terms of both my manager, my direct reports, my peers, look, I'm going to be a little off. And they respected my time, my boundaries. When they were off, they shared with me. And together, both of us being vulnerable, we actually got more stuff done and built the team morale, and trust grew even stronger. So I would suggest you do that. My next tip is, set short-term goals. Our careers, our jobs, our lives are a long-term journey. And when things are sort of going on around you, if you don't set short-term goals and then celebrate them, what ends up happening is you just feel like you're running in quicksand, right? Everyone feels stuck forever. And then also, again, your people are going to feel like they're just kind of robots in a factory. So you've got to remember to set those short-term goals, make them milestones, accomplish them, and then celebrate them. Little things like thank you, good job still go a long way. I know in 2020, I wasn't the best at it because, again, we were just dealing with everything that was going around. So we had to step up our efforts. And then the last thing I'll say is, don't forget who you are, right? At the end of the day, you still need your mental health. You still need your balance. You have to figure out how to navigate the world. When the pandemic started, I definitely just kind of locked into work. Again, right when the pandemic started, my mother passed away, so we had to deal with that. And so I lost myself a little bit, right? Wasn't praying as much, wasn't working out as much, and just was totally focused in on work. And then kind of once I remembered that the things that were important to me, I pivoted. And the other thing that I did too is I kind of looked up and realized that we had a lot going on in our community, right? The pandemic was hitting us hard. And the racial and social injustice was hitting us hard. So I tripled down on those efforts. I got involved in the campaign and did volunteer work, both knocking on doors in Philly and did voter protection work. I joined the National Board of Alpha, which is an organization dedicated to empowering Latinos and Latinas. I reached out to all my mentees. I reached out to people in my support system, both up and down. Sometimes it wasn't just work related. It was just checking in, right? Reminding ourselves that we are human and we have to take care of ourselves. And so, I really strongly suggest that you don't forget that as things are getting more difficult. So those are the 5 tips that I'd share with you all today. I hope that you found them helpful. Again, I would say that anytime you're facing that brick wall of adversity, keep reaching into your bag. And, you know, I'll leave you with that same question, right? The next time that you're faced with a brick wall of adversity, what are you going to put in your bag?